Now, there are two texts which are extremely important to the practice of Kriya Yoga. The Yoga Sutras is certainly one of them. The other is the Bhagavad Gita, which we'll also explore. And the difference between the two, from my perspective, is that the Bhagavad Gita helps us understand what the spiritual path is actually like, what to expect, what kind of philosophical understanding you need in order to approach Kriya Yoga practice. And the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, that has always seemed to me to be a very specific text that tells you how it's done. So the Bhagavad Gita puts it in context. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali tell you how to experience samadhi, tell you how to experience a superconscious state. So I find these very important. And when Paramahansa Yogananda was coming to the West, Sri Yukteswar, his guru, his teacher, had told him, when you teach Kriya Yoga, teach it from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So that's why we put a lot of emphasis on this. Now, to get started, the very first sutra we want to explore is 1.1, chapter 1, sutra 1, where it says, now instruction in yoga. Now instruction in yoga. And this seems like a very benign sutra, as though it's just introducing you to this idea of what we're going to do. However, it's important because it's implying that you are ready to practice Kriya Yoga. You are ready to practice yoga. And the reason we make this distinction is because a lot of people think, oh, it's easy. I'm just going to start meditating, and then this is all going to work in a beautiful way. And after a few years, I'm going to be enlightened, and that's going to be that. But this sutra is saying that you have to kind of be at a good place in order to do this. In order to practice yoga, and Kriya Yoga specifically, what we're learning to do is to navigate subtler states of consciousness. You know, everyone else in the world is wandering around and they're wanting to have babies, they're wanting to, make more money, they're wanting to have fun, they're wanting to explore their hobbies. But that's not what yoga is about. Yoga is not about achieving things in the physical world. Yoga is about learning to acknowledge, feel, and experience directly what you are as infinite spirit. Yogananda would say what you are as God. I don't use that word a whole lot because I think it's got some interesting connotations. I like to imagine this idea of recognizing what are you as this infinite, eternal being which has existed forever. That is what yoga is trying to do. And in order to be able to do that, you have to have your life in some kind of balance to begin with. If you're always distracted by anxieties, if you're always worried about making more money, if you're always, focused on external things, when you sit down to meditate, most of the time, all you're going to be doing is reviewing those anxieties, those psychological complexes, whatever you're interested in, that's going to be kind of percolating through your mind. So this sutra in particular, now instruction in yoga, is essentially saying you are at a place in your life where you can make the exploration of spirit, hopefully your most important thing. All right. And I think there is a reason that some traditions have this idea of what you do is you're born, you become a student, you learn what you're going to be doing in this world, and then you become an adult, and then you work, you contribute to the world, you have a family, and then eventually, once you've done all of that stuff, then you retire, you become a renunciate, you retire to the forest, or you retire to your closet, wherever it is, because then you will no longer be distracted by all this stuff of the world, and you can put your attention on this subtler process. So whenever we begin studying the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and we see now instruction in yoga, essentially that's kind of asking, are you ready to do what it takes to turn your attention within so that you can experience the promise of yoga? Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on what I think that means. One of the required books for this class, if you don't already have it, is An Essential Guide to Kriya Yoga Practice. And I spend probably, most of the book, the first quarter to a third of the book talking about what it takes to be prepared for this. And we will get kind of into this when we explore the yamas and niyamas, being truthfulness, being harmless, and so on. But wait until we get there. After we have this first sutra, now instruction in yoga, then we have a definition of what the process is. So 1.2 says, yoga is the process of ending the definitions of the field of consciousness. Yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha. So yoga is this process of ending the changes and fluctuations in your consciousness. So everything we do is to that end. And when that occurs, then the seer abides in its own nature. That's the following sutra. So essentially what we're seeing here is that through the practice of yoga, it is like you are learning to still the waves or the ripples on a pond. That's a common analogy that people use. And when those waves and ripples are stilled, you have the ability to see the depth of the pond. And so as we learn to meditate, as we learn to do everything that it takes to calm that down, then it is revealed to us what we are as spirit. It happens naturally. So in a sense, we are not trying to achieve, we're not trying to become more spiritual. We are not trying to, discover what we've always been. We are simply going through a process that reveals it to us. So it's not an achievement in any way. It's just a natural process. And it is not easy. I'm not one of those teachers that says, here's a magical technique, you just do this, and you're going to be able to do this well. It takes practice and it takes time. And so when you do the meditation techniques that we're going to be learning, like the one we did today, if it was difficult for you, that's okay, because everything's difficult in the beginning. And what we're learning to do is to train our consciousness to give us the ability to focus, to concentrate our awareness on one thing, usually the technique. And when we can learn to do that, everything else falls away. And then eventually, through the process of yoga, we even learn to let go of the technique or the point of focus that we're looking at. And then we can abide in that naturally still state of the seer, of the witness. That is the whole purpose of what we're trying to do here. So whether we're chanting through the chakras, whether we are engaged in prayer or moving life force through the spine, all of that is to retrain our consciousness. And this goes to one of the particular words in this definition of nirodha. It's interesting because if we can look at our life and our life experience simply as habit, this will make a lot more sense. Most of us are in the habit of defining ourselves through outward experience. We're in the habit of feeling a pain in our body and thinking, oh no, I've got a pain. What's going on? This must be me. Or we're in a habit of a relationship goes wrong. And so we think there's something wrong with us. Or a relationship goes well and we think we must be wonderful. So we're in this habit of defining ourselves through outward experience, but that's only because of momentum. It's only because our consciousness has a momentum of flowing outward. And what we are learning to do with yoga practice is reverse the momentum. So instead of defining ourselves outwardly, we're learning to withdraw our attention inwardly. And when we do that enough, it's like eventually this Nirodha, this ending process, becomes stronger than the outward flow. So the people that you look up to, spiritually speaking, the saints and sages, what they have done is they have just reversed the momentum. So it's just easier for them to stay within, to abide as the seer, because they've put more attention towards doing that versus what everyone else in the world does, which is watch TV, scroll around on Facebook and Instagram, defines themselves through all the outward flowing senses. So this whole process is really just a reversing, in a way, of our consciousness, and doing it so often that it is doing it so much that it becomes harder to be distracted, right? It becomes harder to be distracted and easier to stay within, easier to stay as this witnessing presence, easier to stay with a sense of connection to God, the infinite consciousness, and so on. That is essentially what we are doing. And everything in your life, when you begin practicing Kriya Yoga, you start sort of putting the pieces in place so that everything is diverting your awareness in that way versus wasting it in an outward flow. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does this make sense? Okay, good.